For Cybercrime Radio, I'm Charlie Osborne. This is Redefining Authentication, a Cybercrime Magazine podcast series brought to you by Keyless Technologies, which offers strong, privacy-focused, passwordless authentication that dramatically reduces ATO fraud whilst improving the user experience for customers and the workforce. To learn more about our sponsor, visit keyless.io. Joining me today is Paolo Gasti, Keyless co-founder and CTO. Paolo, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So today's topic is deepfakes. To kick things off, Paolo, can you tell us what deepfakes are and why they're currently in the news?
Absolutely. So deepfakes are a new way to create videos of people not based on real footage, but based on AI-generated footage. So imagine, for instance, being able to swap a face in a video of a person with somebody else's, right? By doing that, you could have you yourself in the body of someone else, as this person in the video is doing whatever it is doing in the video. So again, this is to swap identity between two people. Or you can have something else like, for instance, an expression swap, where you have a video of a person and you animate that face with someone else's expression. So the identity doesn't change, but the things that this person is doing in the video change. And you can see how this could, of course, have implications from an entertainment point of view, right? It's fun maybe to put your own identity into someone else and swap faces. Or it's also fun maybe to have someone else do or say things that they didn't really do. But also, I'm sure you can see the implications beyond entertainment. And we've seen a lot of that recently. And in particular, we've seen a lot of applications of deepfakes where people have tried to trick both humans and automated verification systems, right? Based on, for instance, face or other signs of identity into believing that who they were looking at was someone other than what they actually were. And if you look at the news recently, you might have seen a lot of references to deepfakes and usage and applications of deepfakes. Maybe one of the most famous that came out recently was the story about this Hong Kong finance worker who ended up transferring a large sum of money, we're talking about millions of dollars, into some fraudster's bank account. It sounds preposterous, right, on its face. But then if you look a little bit more into the details of the story, you see that really anyone could have fallen for it, right? Imagine that you get an email saying, hey, you need to transfer this amount of money to this bank account. Of course, now we're all trained to look at these emails and say, oh, this is obviously a scam. But then imagine a twist where someone says, no, you don't have to transfer anything. Let's get on a call. Let's have a chat. And then we'll see there, right? And then you show up in this call and you see people that you're familiar with, you worked with in the past, and they're all saying the right thing. They all have the right information. They all look like how they're supposed to look like. But instead, they are all fake, right? This is all fraudsters using this deepfake face swap technologies precisely to trick someone live at that point into doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So this just shows the power of these technologies.
And when it comes to deepfakes in security contexts, I'd like to discuss that a bit further. For example, does it impact how we look at security on a foundational level when it comes to things like physical or behavioral traits?
Absolutely. And it does in several different ways. If you think about an authentication system, right? An authentication system is trained to recognize a specific person, right? So you do what is called an enrollment, where you show the system how you look like, and then subsequently you can authenticate. You can present some traits that you have, let's say face or fingerprint, and based on this trait, the system can tell whether or not it's still you. Now, for most biometric systems, for most authentication systems, this is not the end. One of the very important things that you want to check in this system is whether or not the signal is fresh, whether or not there's a live person in front of the sensor, again, whether it's a camera or a fingerprint sensor. We want to make sure that this is not an attack based on replaying some previous feature, but there is a real person right there and right now. And here's where deepfakes really come into play, because many of these biometric systems rely on certain actions that the user is doing, right? If you think about face, for instance, you might have a system that asks the user to move their head a little bit, right? Smile or blink or do some simple actions that until recently were assumed to be unique to a live individual in front of the screen, right? Imagine that I record the video of you, maybe on a Zoom call, or I find the video on YouTube or on Facebook. That video is not going to blink at the right time or nod at the right time or in the right order, right? So if you build the system the way, at least that's how we used to think, if you build the system that way, it's going to be really hard to put together some signals that match those maybe even randomized challenges, right? So this is something that deepfakes change completely, right? And this is a first strong implication of deepfakes with respect to security and authentication, right? For instance, if you can do an expression swap where you take a victim's video or a victim's image and you perform the actions being requested, but deepfake system projects those actions on the video of the victim, then you have exactly what is needed to bypass the system. When the system asks you to nod, you nod, and your victim in the video will nod as instructed by the deepfake, right? What it means is that any challenge response system is really something that a deepfake can probably defeat. So now one of the very important steps of authentication, which is this liveness detection, is no longer as strong as it would be. Again, in the context of active liveness detection, right? In a challenge response liveness detection, which is also not the only kind of liveness detection. And this is something, of course, that I'm happy to discuss further.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
Say goodbye to passwords, PINs, and OTPs, and welcome to passwordless authentication with Keyless. As the leader in privacy-preserving biometrics, Keyless can authenticate your customers and employees without storing their biometric data anywhere. With a fast-growing customer base in the banking, fintech, and gaming sectors, join us as we redefine how the world authenticates. To learn more, visit keyless.io.
And now, back to the podcast.
And another question I had for you was whether or not you think deepfakes could eventually erode trust in individual victims such as public or political figures. For example, in the UK, there's a well-known and trusted financial expert. He's called Martin Lewis, and he's constantly fighting social networks, including Facebook, to remove cryptocurrency ads that are using his face to fraudulently promote scams. In this manner, I could see deepfakes potentially being the next sort of step up in widespread fraud.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've seen that both in the political sphere, right? We've seen it in terms of building campaigns for influencing the public by tricking people into believing that politicians or famous people did or said something they actually didn't. I've been talking about video deepfakes where you impersonate other people, but there's also a lot that has been done towards audio deepfakes. There was recently actually a big case here in the United States where there was a deepfake Biden robocall where you had someone that totally sounded like Biden calling people and telling them not to vote. So again, the repercussions here are huge, right? We're talking about impersonation with the goal of tricking people into giving money to these perpetrators, changing political views, disenfranchising people, right, from voting. These are all things that have meaningful financial but also political implications. So clearly there is more that we need to do towards detecting and preventing deepfakes. And there's a lot, of course, that companies but also university and research labs are investing into detecting and preventing these attacks.
And on that note, I'd like to know how authentication companies are currently dealing with deepfakes.
There is a lot of work that has been going into this in the past couple of years. A lot of it builds on video and audio forensics. This is an older field, right, where you have, for instance, some video and you need to tell whether or not it's been edited, or audio, same thing, has been edited to show something different or sound different from what it originally sounded or looked like. Deepfake countermeasure build on it, but the challenge is quite different. A lot of the techniques that were designed for video forensics no longer work for AI generated videos because the signals and the assumptions that were made in these techniques no longer hold. There is another angle to this also, that is deepfakes are often used in real time. As I was saying earlier in this Zoom call, where this Hong Kong financier was tricked into sending a lot of money to this fraudster. Those are real-time deepfakes, something that video forensics and audio forensics are now really designed to deal with. Deepfakes are also getting better by the day. So whatever techniques we're using today might not be suitable tomorrow. There's a good example there of around 2018, there were a lot of techniques designed to detect deepfakes that relied on how users would blink or move their mouth in sync with the audio. Now these techniques no longer work, at least not as well, because deepfakes have evolved to the point where blinking is now really good, and so is lip syncing. And we'll see more and more of that, right? There are still some telltale signs of deepfakes, but arguably in 5 years or so, they're no longer going to be as reliable as they are today. So what security companies are doing really is to look into multiple directions. One, of course, is the cat and mouse game, which is working, but it's very expensive and really requires continuous evolution of these techniques. But also there is some thinking outside of the box that has been done in these areas. And one of the things here that I think is very interesting is what I was referring to earlier when I was talking about liveness detection, where I mentioned there is active and passive liveness detection. Again, just to summarize here, an active liveness detection system, whether it's for face or any other signal, requires user to perform some small actions, right? If it's face, for instance, you want to smile, you want to turn your head based on a cue from the system. And again, the assumption here is that these things are hard to mimic, and deepfakes break that assumption. So these active liveness detection systems are no longer as strong as they used to be. But there's another area here that is called passive liveness detection, where we don't ask the user, the system doesn't ask the user to perform any particular action, right? So instead of looking for responses to a particular challenge from the system, we look for other things. For instance, are the movements within the video indicative of some 2D object or 3D object, right? If this is coming from a picture, even though it might be from a deepfake, maybe there are some signs there that can be used. Are the color what we expect? Are the patterns what we expect? Reflection what we expect? And some of these techniques can be very effective against deepfakes in multiple ways. One is the way in which deepfakes can be delivered. If they're delivered like a traditional spoof attack, where maybe you have a screen or you have another phone in front of the camera, then these can be detected by passive liveness detection system. If the attacker decides to bypass the camera system entirely and just inject the video if he has that opportunity, then it becomes, of course, more challenging. There are still some of the techniques that I mentioned can still identify some of the deepfakes, but there is a large area of research where systems are now looking for some pixel level inconsistencies, again, some misalignment between audio and video that is still typical of these systems. So even with passive liveness detection, there are some gaps that the community is still working on, but there are some very promising avenues. And here at Keyless, this is really the direction in which we're going. We built from the ground up a passive liveness detection system that uses exactly these cues. And we've seen internally that this is something that has been quite effective against the deepfakes that are out today. So we're very happy about the results there.
And on that note, Paolo, do you have any advice for our listeners in spotting deepfake content?
Yes. So although this is becoming harder and harder, there are a few things that you can always do to spot deepfakes. Now, of course, the advice changes based on real-time attacks, right? I might say on a call or on a Zoom call with someone right now. And what I can say there is you can no longer really trust that the person you're speaking with, even though it sounds and looks like the person you expect to be speaking, you think you're speaking with, that might not be the case. And if you are, for instance, large sums of money that you might have to transfer in the future, or you may have to perform some important steps within a call moving forward, one of the things that we recommend is to have some secret word, something that you can use to authenticate the person on the other side, regardless of how they sound or how they look like. This is clearly something that would work in the case of deepfakes and would have worked in the example that I gave earlier, but I understand it's easier said than done and requires some pre-planning. In the case of non-real-time deepfakes, right, the video that you find online and it might sound and look very convincing, there's not a lot really that you can do there, especially as deepfakes become more realistic and hard to spot. Really, it's about the source, it's about validation of that video, it's about confirmation from independent third party that that video is authentic. And also there's a little bit of healthy skepticism, right? If what you're saying is something that maybe, especially for political content, right? If something that makes your blood boil a little bit, stop 1 second, take a deep breath, think, maybe it was designed to give that reaction and it's not the real thing. Right? So this is what I would say.
Paolo, thank you for joining us today and sharing your insight with our listeners.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
For Cybercrime Radio, I'm Charlie Osborne. Redefining Authentication is a Cybercrime magazine podcast series brought to you by Keyless Technologies, which offers strong, privacy-focused, passwordless authentication that dramatically reduces ATO fraud whilst improving the user experience for customers and the workforce. To learn more about our sponsor, visit keyless.io, and for more of our media, visit our website at cybersecurityventures.com.